Take charge of your cloud migrations with dependency mapping, inventory, and usage insights. My name is Raleigh Gould, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speakers are Dennis Drogseth, VP of Research at Enterprise Management Associates, and Will Degener, Director of Product Management at Scalable Software. Dennis brings over 30 years of experience in various aspects of marketing and business planning for service management solutions. He supports EMA through leadership in business service management, CMDB systems, automation systems, and service-centric financial optimization. Will brings decades of experience across various aspects of enterprise software solution delivery, specifically in the ITSM and ITAM space. His roles have included consultancy, product management, and development. And before I hand things over to today's featured speakers, I wanted the audience to know that you can log your questions anytime using the Q&A functionality. We will be dedicating the last 10 minutes or so to answering those questions. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA that will include the on-demand playback as well as a PDF of the speaker slides. So I hope you'll check that email out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Dennis Drogseth. Dennis?
Thank you, Raleigh, and welcome everyone. Will and I have a lot to share with you, and I believe the deck will be available if you request. So if there's a lot of data on some of the slides, don't worry about trying to memorize it as we go. It's really there to dramatize or explain anyway certain parts of the cloud narrative that have many dimensions to them, many choices to them, and often many demands. So the overall flow, and Will and I will be working together. You'll see it'll be interspersed. Tell you a little bit about how we got the data, the demographics behind the research, very briefly, but then we'll move on to what's really going on in this so-called journey to the cloud, if it's really not a journey to an end game, but an ongoing process of planning and optimization. We'll look at shadow IT in various forms on how it's beginning to change and color the overall landscape. Then zero in a bit on dependency mapping and how that's hugely relevant to optimizing cloud, planning for cloud. We'll look at some approaches to inventory and usage for becoming ever more critical, which is foundational for understanding what you have and where you're going, what you need to do. And then a little bit on strategy for taking charge of cloud migration. Well, this is the demographic slide. Really, it's a list of research projects, all of which fed data into this webinar, starting from late last year and going back a few years. It's looking at it from everything from digital war room needs to optimizing IT for financial performance to the future of IT service management to casualties of cloud wars, as you see down there, and even looking at customer and user experience data, all of which helps to inform the story. And that, I think, that narrative, that list, it also underscores the fact that cloud does have many dimensions to it. It's not a linear process, nor is it, again, a simple end game. So this is taken from actually late last year, so fairly current. How many workloads do you have already in the cloud? And we're really looking at environments with 500 or more employees. So we're not looking at really mom-pop shop in any of the data here. I think it's significant that, okay, on the average, there's 20%. You can see only 4%, as of Q4 last year, had no workloads in the cloud. You can also see that 15%, if you add a few things together, have more than 50% of their workloads in the cloud. And one of the things we've seen as a theme is generally larger companies and more effective companies, more successful companies in various initiatives are also tend to be more progressive in how they approach cloud and move to cloud.
Hi, Dennis. Will. I found this, when I first saw this slide, I found it really interesting that there was only 4% of the sample reported no workloads in the cloud. And if you sort of turn that around, obviously, 96% of the sample have something and likely to be an increasing amount in the cloud. I think that's a really interesting statistic.
Yeah, it struck me, and I mean, again, the context, interestingly enough, was our digital war room, but that was our last research where we got data, and it's clearly an ongoing trend. And again, as headed here, when we say cloud on this particular data set, it's public cloud. We're not talking private cloud.
Of course.
So we also track cloud spending in the Optimizing IT for Financial Performance research. And here you can see, and that was a year before last, 30% of the budgets were spent on public and or private. Okay, so this combines the two. With a combined general growth rate of 10% per year. And once again, we saw metrics where if you had more spending and were doing more in cloud, then you tended to be more successful. And finally, you can see, was you mentioned that below that bullet, there's definitely also an alignment of companies with company size. Larger companies are a little more progressive in getting into the cloud overall, and of course, there's some exceptions.
It's interesting that you suggest more successful businesses are sort of adopting the cloud faster, and I think we can. I make some interesting observations a bit later on that. So yeah, that's interesting to use those words.
Yeah, I'm not prejudiced, by the way. I'm not as much as I believe in cloud. I also believe that as I've said to you, I don't like the phrase "journey to the cloud" because it implies that it's an end game, which it's not. It's not a spa or a place to recreate. It's a series of challenges, but that can be used very creatively to support IT. And some of the other features we saw with our bigger cloud spenders, 60% of budget or more, they had naturally more strategic priorities, not just for cloud, but for optimizing IT as a whole. They had more investments in advanced tools, such as inventory and discovery, which we'll talk about a little later in the webinar. They were, interestingly enough, and this may sound counterintuitive or counter-hype anyway, more likely to have some kind of configuration management database or configuration management system, often a more federated approach, with some level of dependency mapping, which is so valuable. And we'll talk more about that as well. So why? Why are people doing it? Besides just reading that it's a good thing to do in the news all the time. The dominant trend here is increased flexibility and agility, as you can see in the orange in the middle. Then cost savings, and beneath it, the shifting expenditures towards operations versus just CapEx, kind of relating to, okay, we're now investing in the efficiencies of IT overall. But if you add the data below, you also see, and this was check all that apply, right? So there's more than 100% total. 51% checked what I call political reasons, pressures from senior management or pressures from lines of business, and Will indicated that earlier. I'd like to read just a couple of quotes from some of our consulting and interviews on three different statures in going to the public cloud in particular. So here's one this was a very current, end of last year, large European retailer. It says, fully including cloud as a near-term future direction. We're currently discovering all of our core infrastructure except public cloud, so they're not really there yet. It's on the roadmap. We have a partnership with Google in this case. We have a cloud-first strategy as new business services and new applications require new releases ever more frequently. So now when every minute is money, everything must be optimized as we shift to cloud. So that's right, very current, but he's still not really there yet. Here's someone who's all the way in. This was a couple of years ago. For several years, we've been investing heavily in the public cloud, building new and rebuilding core business applications, and are already running over 100 applications there. And here, the driver is basically more agile DevOps, leveraging microservices, leveraging cloud capabilities. And last, one perspective from a service provider that feels they have the depth to really make cloud migration work beyond sort of a linear, trivial approach. He says, we provide end-to-end capabilities for monitoring cloud, private, public, software as a service, infrastructure as a service. One of our differentiators for clients is supporting this rather complex journey to the cloud. So
I love these statistics, Dennis, and I don't think there's any surprises here. But I guess the increased flexibility or agility, getting out over the cost savings is very indicative, and they really are key drivers for cloud services. I mean, it very much cuts through complexities and investment costs of sort of the on-premise solution. So yeah, I really like those statistics.
I think it's early on when we first started tracking, by the way, we saw cost as the primary driver. But I would say about 5 years ago or so, flexibility turned out to be, and agility turned out to be the greater drivers. And of course, indirectly there are cost factors there, but there are also challenges. You're going to be more flexible, as we'll see. It may change a little bit how you actually work. So what sorts of applications are coming out of the cloud? And this list is never-ending and always changing. But when we got the data, we saw 56% were doing software as a service, 52% were doing internally hosted virtual apps, 48% internally hosted virtual desktop, 48% platform as a service, 46% internal infrastructure as a service, et cetera. And going on down, externally hosted infrastructure as a service at the bottom is 43%. And just underneath that, we also saw things such as web hosting via cloud service providers. So I want my critical web for business in the cloud, hosted there. And along with that, with application performance enhancement and application acceleration through cloud service providers. What was not, we also got data on stuff we don't really want to move to the cloud so quickly. Although I should say that 37% of our respondents said there's nothing we're not ready to move to public cloud. Those areas where they were most concerned were applications that were compliance sensitive, or big data servers, or database servers were all sort of maybe not into the public cloud yet. And that's, of course, changing. But pretty much everything is moving now. So here, cloud definitely also has its challenges, as we've been implying. This is a very sort of microscopic look at one major challenge, nonetheless. In terms of asset audits, and you can see, 61%, if you add the top two, see it's either significantly or radically impacted their auditing capabilities. Only 6%, which is a pretty dramatic number, say cloud.
Sorry, Dennis, I didn't mean to speak over you. No, but yeah, that's exactly what I saw when I saw this slide. 94% of all who took part felt their processes were affected. I mean, that's, I hate to use the word too often, but it's certainly a disruptive force in our world today. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, Yeah, it is disruptive. What's interesting too, once again, it may seem counterintuitive, but we found the more effective, and this is optimizing IT for financial performance, were more likely to be radically or significantly impacted, which meant that they were more prepared to make changes or willing to make changes than not, and they were more effective in the end because of it.
I see.
So what are more broadly some of the challenges? And here we're getting data in terms of the future of IT service management. And right there you see a list. The top is at 30%, making asset management more challenging. And then the next three, interestingly enough, are all tied at 28%. Shortening review cycles, changing how we approach release management, and quite tellingly, changing how we're organized. We're seeing a need for IT to become much more cross-domain, much more agile in how it works, not just about release management there, much more flexible. And so not surprised to see that as a registering rather high. Higher levels of automation, well, think about that. If your release cycles are shortened and you have less time to manage change, automation is a critical investment for cloud. And then more attention to bringing security and operations together. We're seeing huge trends there, putting pressures to justify costs. And interestingly, tied with that, or just below it by 1 percentage point, on the other hand, we see public cloud specifically, and that's not on this list, as a resource for running our ITSM software. So the move to software as a service is appealing. Paying more attention to DevOps was another. It's not on the slide here. And here's an interesting pressure. We are now really having to put software as a service from third party into our catalogs that we used to use just for our own material. I would also share one last bit of data here, which is when we look at how many people are devoted just to public cloud, you look at that organization, and all I do is support the requirement to move to public cloud. We saw an average of about 2, although about 48% had 3 or more full-time individuals fully dedicated to move to public cloud. So, well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dennis. And I'll give you a break now. So you've had your marathon run. So completely, the challenges you described in that last slide are, ever more prevalent, and it's obvious that the IT landscape is becoming ever more diverse and complex to manage. I think we're all agreed. I think in a previous webinar we also discussed how many tools businesses use to ensure they have a complete picture of their assets, and I think there was one even had sort of 25 or something. Of course, I'm seeing that cloud services compound this again, whether they use a tool to migrate just that one transactional thing, or whether they need a set of tools to then have that compound inventory. And so we require a diverse range of intelligence, and what we believe at Scalable is Asset Vision provides that diverse range. What problems are we trying to solve? There's these accountability challenges. We're all hearing a lot about cloud shock, which is the side effect of both this race to the cloud and some of those other hidden expenditures, which, for example, easy access to infrastructure as a service and subscription services give lines of business the ability to easily expense service that subsequently leads to the inevitable unpleasant shock when the bills arrive or the costs are enumerated across an entire business, right? So, importantly, those who are ultimately accountable for the expenditures face quite a big challenge in identifying exactly where money's being spent, across an enterprise. And that bedrock, as we say, that foundational inventory is changing. Yeah, so it's no longer that sort of fixed bedrock, and as we've alluded to in an earlier slide, I think is what was once a very firm foundation is now a complex mix of physical, virtual, on-premise, off-premise, cloud, multiple providers, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, and others, subscription services, and the list goes on. And I think, at the very least, it's a huge headache. Yeah. So, sort of to describe our customer experiences in this context, Asset Vision obviously affords them the ability to look at this sort of complex estate across a very diverse range of technologies, in a single place. Using an equally diverse set of probes and technologies, we query these sort of disparate data sources or IT assets or cloud providers to bring it together in, dare I say it, my first quote your fingers, single pane of glass, right? Once it's there, what our customers can do, and all do, in fact, is they'll augment that information with their own business data. So suddenly, not only are we getting disparate data sources in a single place and looking at our hideously complex estate across multiple providers, we can then align that to the business. So we can start to say, show me all the assets for a particular business, which is a really easy question to ask, and hopefully something that Asset Vision can provide that sort of complex and intangible, often invisible estate. It becomes something that we can report on centrally. And really going a step further with this intangible, tangible, adding another dimension with the client-based web application usage information, which we'll talk about a bit later in another slide. Our customers can then quantify use of that literally zero footprint web-based IT. So that's what we're seeing, and hopefully everything we're providing. It's back to you, Dennis.
Thank you. Well, that's great. Yeah. A great way to begin to take control of all these multidimensional areas. So this is our section on shadow IT, and I think both Will and I had a conversation about the term itself. Will can share his thoughts shortly, but we've asked here, are you supporting shadow IT? And you can see somewhat significantly and no, and more significant perhaps on the very next slide. Only 37% of the respondents felt it wasn't a problem.
Go ahead. Sorry, Dennis. I was very interested in the last slide, that 29%. I thought that was unusually high. And I wonder if a percentage of those don't actually know due to the sort of invisible nature of the shadow IT, that perhaps it's having more of an effect than they're actually aware of, which is an interesting idea.
But some of the no, actually, good point. Some of the no might be, what do you mean by shadow IT? So there is, every term in our business is really carries ambivalence. So shadow IT has that sort of negative feel. Some of the people who answered no may have been thinking about some DevOps teams or line of business app development that they didn't feel was shadow IT, but others might have called shadow IT. So I think that's part of the answer too.
Yeah.
And that but nonetheless, that negative is very evident in this slide here, where you see disruptive and 16% finding it major disruptive and a challenge to their credibility. So this slide really reflects questions about central IT versus federated IT, which is a bit like shadow IT or line of business centric IT. One of the things I'll say again in prep for Will to talk as well, shadow IT can mean many things. If it does mean a more federated approach that's actually managed through central IT and coordinated through central IT, I believe you've got the maximum benefit. Cloud is a factor in driving that. You could see the political pressures of going to cloud early on, and cloud also provides resources, sometimes a bit too tempting, for lines of business to go dive in, and development teams, as we'll talk about a little bit later, to do things that may not be the most secure in the world. But what we saw in terms of advantages in a central kind of coordination, where ideally, if there are federated teams, you can understand what tools are being used, look for redundancies, manage costs consistently, was that central IT, nonetheless, tended to be better led, more executive overall, twice as likely to grow as line of business-centric federated. And that, again, may cry in the face of most opinions. More likely to pursue critical investments in analytics and big data. More likely to have CMDB CMS for sure. More likely actually to have integrated cloud-related services in its catalogs and portals. Really bringing cloud home because they have the added resources. Interestingly enough, more likely to be engaged with Agile DevOps with a fast-track support. And here we're probably talking about a federated world in some ways where their line of business coming in, but it's being managed through and integrated through central IT. I know that's another webinar, and I'll be doing one on DevOps in a few months. And more likely to be involved in supporting business workflows. So, Will.
Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, we've had loads of discussions regarding shadow IT recently, and it's a great topic of conversation, and I'm sure that term will start to lose favour quite soon. Don't get me started on digital transformation. But let's talk a little bit about what's driving this evolution from my perspective. And subscription services have caused an explosion of not just shadow IT, but literally invisible IT. That line of business IT that just appears from nowhere. And to be fair, SaaS delivery greatly benefits vendors and consumers. So from a vendor perspective, we, Scalable, and directly me in my role, we release updates to our Asset Vision platform about every 8 weeks, right? So we could never be able to do that if we had to release physical software out to our customers. I mean, the costs would be huge. Our customers would fall behind very quickly, and we wouldn't have control over their environment. And as we control the hardware platform, we have our known variables. We don't make changes to a customer's environment. Releasing updates is well controlled and manageable. It affords us great agility with the ability to sort of respond to customer and market demands quickly. So obviously, we as vendors, I think they definitely encourage the use and the explosion. But we all know about the success of SaaS products such as ServiceNow, Salesforce, Asset Vision. Too many to mention, right? But it doesn't stop there. Infrastructure is available on the same model. Shadow, hidden, invisible IT can now include compute services, remote desktops, servers, storage, databases, bought by anyone with a credit card and a mind to do so. So this sounds terrible from a control perspective, but removes restrictions from the line of business to be able to deliver quickly, disruptively, in an agile manner. So I suggested at a conference a few weeks ago that we should try and find another term for shadow IT, as I'm personally of the opinion that it's not necessarily the bad thing that shadow might suggest, and that sort of flexibility, agility, lots of itties, shorter time to operation is what really drives businesses today. And we both use the word disruptive, but I think it's now a word which is used to positively describe innovative businesses and individuals. Now, so getting back to sort of Asset Vision. So how does Asset Vision fit in? Well, we help our customers to support their agile workplaces by gathering that central intelligence. And that central intelligence doesn't really have to be used to be the control, the overlord, in this agile workplace. But at the very least allows the people that have to control or at least to have an understanding of what's going on, they can understand and identify which would lead to a few things. A few examples. So, reduction of tool duplication. So if a business is using 5 different messaging services, wouldn't surprise me. Simply because they can. They need to make decisions as a whole on what they're using and identify and weed out any services which aren't conforming. Now, this doesn't mean they wouldn't sort of review and change it, but if we use Microsoft Teams as a corporate tool, and it's included in our existing subscription, and another part of the business starts to use Slack because they prefer it, we're kind of doubling a cost there. And if it means that the business has to come in and choose, right, well, let's all move to a different tool, so be it. Understanding it centrally is the right way to go. And of course, another example could be that perhaps we're all using, for argument's sake, Slack, and I'm not working for Slack. They're all using one particular tool, but they've all got their own subscriptions. And I'm pretty sure all those 0 to 10 subscriptions are sort of either, when you add them all together, probably would equate to a volume discount if centrally purchased across the enterprise. And last but by no means least, and this is the agile workplace, this disruptive thing, is running the winners and cutting the losers is a sort of term I'm seeing, which is if you know and you find out what's being used across an entire business, you can start to understand, well, look, if 80% of your business is using one subscription service and the other 20%, maybe they've become frustrated with that and sort of disappeared off and started to use something else because it's better. Well, actually, if it's better, let's embrace that. Let's cut the losers. And of course, subscription services you can switch on and off very quickly. An entire team can evaluate a tool, using a credit card or even a free service very quickly. Just turn it on, turn it off. Just like, and I often say, just like when I install an app on my iPhone, within 2 minutes I've made a decision if it's going to work for me. It's too complicated or it looks horrible. Just turn it off, get rid of it, find another one. So that's where asset vision sits in and sort of gives the lens to the enterprise about what's out there, not necessarily for control, but for understanding and to leverage those values. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you. Well, that's really great, and I like all the dimensions there. I mean, better pricing, winners, losers, everything. I will now move to the dependency mapping, changing the game. I'm a really big believer in this area. We've researched it extensively. The discovery and dependency mapping for DDM. Sometimes it's called with application in front. It's a huge growth area in the industry, and it takes many forms and many shapes. And one of the areas, by the way, that we saw a huge value, although this is focused on IT service management respondents, we saw huge value in analytics. One of the things that was coming together toward the end of last year in research on AI ops and advanced analytics for IT was how critical understanding relationships and contexts were, and more broadly, of course, for performance management, as well as asset management and other dimensions. So here, and also as, of course, a complement and sometimes a way of populating a CMDB and CMS. Well, here you can see a list. I would actually say as many items here on this list as there are. It's not necessarily complete. As we'll move to the next 2 slides, I'll be sharing an interview I did on dependency mapping in cloud. But you can see the diversity in terms of performance and availability, of course, data center consolidation, change, asset, vulnerability. Only 3% are saying, well, I don't care about discovery and dependency mapping. So this is an 8-point conversation that I had actually 2 years ago with a gentleman who was leveraging discovery and dependency mapping directly in context with cloud migration and optimizing cloud. And I'll paraphrase some of what he said. So, number 1, understanding the data center. You need more, not less, visibility across the full data center and the broader IT environment if you're really serious about moving to cloud. And this includes interdependencies across both public and private, public cloud service providers and your own private environment. You need to know what's active and what's not. That's really important. And once you have all this data, you not only can support planning better, but it also can directly leverage through other tools, reduce mean time to repair, and just become also a great facility for communication across your team. It allows everyone to see context for what they're doing. Provisioning. So there are multiple ways to, of course, provision on new environments in cloud. Some can be on demand, some can be scheduled. Here he looked at both. He looked also at deployment requirements for supporting a developer requesting unique infrastructure in the cloud. And again, I would stress he did this type of thing both as an automated process and also as a schedule on demand. Service impact. What happens when you make a change? And that also has multiple dimensions to it. It can be used before a change is made in order to anticipate what will happen, but can also be used after a change is made to see if there are performance issues, for instance, again, or compliance issues, what might need to change. So that's really critical as well. Continual insight. So it's not a one-time thing. Why? Because things continue to move all the time. As he points out in my conversation, a sudden triggering of vMotion can disrupt service performance, and discovery and dependency mapping can catch that through routine updates or in near real time. So it has an ongoing value as well.
I think that's that continual insight is something that's very powerful. A CMDB is fantastic, but as soon as you've written it down or entered it into the database, it's potentially out of date because of the what we're talking about, the speed and agility of infrastructure today. So that continual insight is so key.
Yeah, it's not a one. I mean, things change now more than ever. So the notion that we've done it for this year is, I think, long gone. And cloud certainly exacerbates that. Compliance and risk management, not a surprise, is a key area. And so one example he pointed out was what are the outliers when there's a new patch update relevant to a new security threat? Where do we find them? How do we know what's there? The combination of discovery and dependency mapping for the application. No server left behind is kind of a multi-thought as well. For one, it helps you understand servers that are not properly registered with your configuration management tools so you can manage them better. It also, and he talked about shadow IT here as well. This is this area where you can leverage discovery and dependency mapping to not so much rein in, but coordinate your federated deployments and see what's where once you have access, and manage the whole much more consistently. Finally, he talked about developers and kind of oversight that they got through DDM. In this case, he complained about Amazon's web service in the U.S. with 30,000 community-built Amazon machine images, not all of which were quite as they should be, missing patches. And so that was another area for him to take a bit of control. Application workload migration. Again, you're going to migrate your workloads. You want to understand what the impacts are, where you should go, what the history is. And that could be true for multiple servers, databases, application components, etc. Finally, software license management, one of the key focuses here. Both private and public cloud tend to make this more of a challenge, he says, and it's true. We see that in our data. But he's seen a lot of benefits through discovery and dependency mapping for managing that more cohesively. And he really sees it in two dimensions. One is minimizing excess costs where you're not using critical servers or critical infrastructure for your applications. And the other is avoiding costly license compliance violations where you actually don't know that you're using something that you should be paying for. So, Will, I'll turn it to you.
So true. Thanks, Dennis. Dependency mapping is fabulous. I love this data. Sorry to be so excited, but I've used this before. This idea of it being like a flashlight in the darkened basement of an IT estate, right? So if you imagine using asset vision dependency mapping as a flashlight shining across your basement and identifying boxes in the dark, whether they be computers, servers, software. And once you found a box, you see the sort of threads, the string, if you like, reaching out into the dark from one component to another, and then you can follow that thread that goes from one component inside one box to find other boxes and components with their own threads and so on, and building up that complex spider web of interconnectivity in the darkness. And if you kind of layer that on with another imagination idea, which is different components, that's like a SQL server or Apache web server or your Oracle database, have different color strings. So you can really start to build out that sort of visualization in your the spider web in your basement. And I quite like that idea, and you can imagine how complex that spider web would become very quickly. And so, as I suggested earlier, a CMDB typically is sort of business-led and developed, and often you determine what services should look like, and what they should be doing, and who should be consuming them, right? So our customers would use this flashlight to provide them with the intelligence of what servers are actually doing. And that goes with your point on the previous slide, Dennis. Rather than what they should be doing. And using this term, a near real-time source of truth. And really gives you that intelligence, what really happens if I switch this off. Yeah, so that's dependency mapping. But customer use cases are obviously hugely diverse. Some interesting examples are identifying cross-network or geography communication. So, I'm using a web application calls data from a database in a different data center, but it's using the LAN as connectivity. So, quote your fingers, free. If we move those to the cloud without thinking about that impact, potentially they might end up in, completely disparate AWS data centers and either significant latency issues or, for significant network costs. So, being able to utilize that interconnectivity in that very crude manner allows us to understand, these are the things that talk to each other, let's put them close together. These are the things I didn't know that spoke to that thing. Lucky I didn't move it without it, those kind of things. And another interesting one is if we layered on some, as our customers do, that sort of augment that business data that I talked about before. I've seen customer reports that identify cross-business use of server applications. So I've got this application here that does this particular job. Department A has paid for it and developed it, done all of this work, and suddenly Department B starts using it because they can, or because people have migrated from Department A to Department B. And of course, that's paid for by one line of business, and it's being consumed by other lines of business. And it makes for interesting sort of chargeback reports. But nonetheless, that's something to consider if you are moving things. If you're taking, so this is now, instead of becoming one sort of island of application usage, this is now a global application, and we need to think about that performance-wise. So if we then apply, rather than lift and shift based on what we've got, we've now added capability to understand what's talking to what. Was great. Or what's not talking to what's laying there idle, as you said, no server left behind. Well, perhaps some of them should be, or just switched off because, they've been redundant for years, but no one's remembered to turn it off. If we use, alongside that, we use another side of our dependency mapping, which is performance sampling, which allows Asset Vision users to sort of sample that CPU, RAM, disk utilization, and then you can correctly size either under or overutilized assets and whether to reconfigure in place. Actually, that server's doing just fine as it is. I'm not going to move that to the cloud, or if I move it to the cloud, I really need to make it a bigger compute instance or smaller or less RAM or more RAM, and just right sizing when you're moving these things. And of course, if you analyze that, whether it be dependence or performance metrics over time, are hugely powerful. Watching for trends, identify future redundant services or services or infrastructure whose load is increasing, provides that critical intelligence. So, and again, once you've moved to the cloud, maintaining that analysis of that performance figures, you could see actually, if it's a server that's not set up to be elastic, I can identify that I've got some future need to increase whatever values I need to on that cloud infrastructure. So they're the kind of power and trends and capabilities that our flashlight in the basement provides with our dependency mapping tools. And back to you, Dennis.
Thank you. Thanks, Will. Great stuff. So I will move briskly through some of these slides, but they're really, I think, help to make a strong point. So this was looking at optimizing IT for financial performance, and what were stood out as challenges. Well out in front was security and compliance issues associated with audits. That was a number one big challenge. But then usage played in a number of areas. If you look at understanding software and application usage across lines of business, you look at 4, optimizing software as a service on-premise application usage, and you look at getting visibility into spending and usage across public and private cloud, usage, and also a need for inventory and discovery. So we're really looking at both usage and inventory and discovery as a combined set of requirements here. Otherwise, very explicitly, software license audits are critical, and understanding performance issues where dependency mapping can play such a role. So what do we mean by inventory and discovery, what is it key for? One of the interesting things we see is often many IT organizations may have 10, 15, 20, 30 different inventory and discovery tools doing different things. In some ways, that is logical. It's part of, I'm doing performance, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. But having one overall core place to assimilate that is key. And you can look at all the various values, many of which are cloud-related. Actually, all of these, in one way or another, are cloud-related directly or indirectly. So audits, when we looked at how long it takes to plan and be ready for a major audit, an average of 30 hours for major asset inventory, just for the inventory data to really be lined up for a major audit, especially including public and private cloud. You'll see here, if you do play with the math or play with the bars, 24% spent more than 40 hours on the audit, and only 12% spent less than 10 hours. And, we saw in other research that keeping tracks for audits is often complicated by the fact that just data accuracy becomes such an issue. On a weekly basis, we saw 43% of our respondents spent more than 16 hours a week, and 13% more than 25 hours just wrestling with inventory and discovery data in relationship to their assets. Usage, as we've already talked about in many ways, is really primary. And this list is, I think, at this point, echoing many things we've talked about. We need to understand software as a service. We need to understand overall software license requirements, hardware lifecycle, usage on portfolio planning, which is a very creative area. What's most valuable in relationship to what are people actually using? That's a huge growth area for IT. And it's complementary to speed for DevOps. Knowing the impact on IT and business effectiveness, again, by understanding your community and how they're using your services, you can begin to optimize them far more effectively for business. Leveraging inventory where hardware and software come together, understanding endpoint applications that reside on the endpoint need to be mapped into the bigger picture, and knowing outside of cloud traditional data center applications, how they're being used. Bringing that all together in one huge composite picture. Well,
yeah, great points, Dennis. That great, huge composite. I like that. So, yeah, understanding usage and utilization is absolutely key to understanding the inner workings of an IT estate, how it functions, and ultimately driving towards more operational efficiency. It's what everyone wants, I guess. Recapping from our previous slides, I guess, we sort of starting with that single source of truth of inventory against the myriad of technologies we talked about. Alongside that full identification of traditionally installed and usage of SaaS software, through a browser, and the analysis of server communications, what's talking to what, flashlight in the basement. Incredibly powerful. But if we layer on usage, now, as I'm sure you know, Asset Vision provides what's been termed forensic usage data, which simply culminates in a handful of incredibly useful data points. And anyone listening who knows me will sometimes dubbed my favourite 5. And that is, who is using what, from where, and how intensely. So Will is using Visio from his laptop for about 30 minutes and about 20 keystrokes. Not what I typed, just how many keystrokes. And that's incredibly powerful. But if you can apply that to a web-based SaaS application, suddenly you can say ServiceNow, Salesforce, Asset Vision, G Suite, or even an in-house hosted application you wish to move to the cloud perhaps. You can then say Will is using G Suite from his laptop for about 30 minutes and about 20 keystrokes. Or Will is not using Salesforce as often as he should be. Please don't shoot me. Or take the license away because Will no longer needs access to Salesforce. Yeah, so that really gives our customers a clear picture of that changing, visible, invisible hardware, software estate, how it's used and how it might be optimized. So I hope that's a good sort of summary slide. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you, Will. So, wrap up right now. We're almost there. Best strategy for taking charge. And I realize that also could be its own little webinar in itself. This slide is very telling. What organizational and process issues have you seen? And you actually see a couple of mirror images. The top one, more cross-domain focus, is clearly one of the most critical. But if you look at the second, IT became more engaged with business clients, and then look down 3 from the bottom, became less engaged. What's happening there? Proactively, you need to be more engaged to really optimize cloud. Cloud is partly a business as well as IT investment, but it can become a distraction, which means you're less involved. I'll skip one, and we reevaluated work with service providers, which is natural. Your service provider landscape is becoming much more complex. Then IT infrastructure library or best practices, accelerated adoption. Then if you skip down, second from the bottom, you see moved away. And actually best practices in moving to cloud, when you look at the world, especially of DevOps and Agile as well, something we're ongoing researching. Axelos has come out with version 4 of ITIL, which includes a strong reference to automation, which is, I think, encouraging. So metrics are critical. I think these are pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. You're going to go to cloud, you've got to measure what you're doing. And there are technical metrics and there are more business-centric metrics. But here, if you're looking at cost for external and internal and the combination of unified cost for delivery of service, looking at utilization, as we've talked about, speed and provisioning new services, and availability, of course, quality of delivery, and security these are really areas many metrics can apply within each of these bullets. Similarly here, business metrics for optimizing cloud, showing usage from a cost-value perspective, understanding business behaviors in terms of services, and showing preferences in that context. Business process impacts, revenue impacts, activity impacts, and then on the technical side, the handshake, multiple transactions to complete a business service, and then managing your supply chain, which is now becoming often even more complex, partly through the cloud and partly through the internet. So, drawing from our consulting work, I'm wrapping up here with 2 slides on step-by-step to optimize success in cloud migration. Strong believer in a unified, coordinating, cross-siloed, top-down team with executive involvement. Also, effective IT to business dialogue and planning, because cloud is, again, a very hot button and often can lead to some irrational priorities on some fronts. Metrics, as we talked about, keep those in the forefront and evolve them as they make sense. Leading technology investments, and the 3 top and bold have been the focus here, but others that also, by the way, profit, all of those below profit from these 3 top and bold: security compliance, integrated insights, levels of automation, which are critical, advanced analytics, which are critical, an area we're very focused on here, capabilities for understanding context and data resources, sharing data more effectively, modeling with CMDB, CMS, and superior reporting and visualization. We'll wrap up with your last slide.
Thanks, Dennis. So yes, this is my summary slide, and after all that we've discussed today, I'm going to sort of give some facts, opinions, and possibly suggestions here. So, this Asset Vision provides that same view on a changing world. Yeah, we're seeing that people are often tasked with that move to the cloud type actions. That we must do this and seek out something to help them do just that. Yeah, that transactional tool. I think we'd all agree that it's not the end of the story at all. We talked about that. Quite simply, part of the estate's changing, and we're going to need to continue to analyse and evaluate that, changed estate. After the move, the bedrock has become, fluid, elastic, and therefore that ongoing, independent central monitoring is critical. Yeah, I've got a bullet point there that says you mustn't throw out the previous tools. Sorry for the typo. And it's highly likely that parts of your existing infrastructure will remain. So it's not like everything's gone to the cloud, let's get a new tool. We've got to maintain our existing flexible, agile tool. And as I suggested much earlier, this is the present and the future. Things can change really fast. Cloud services and as-a-service subscription support response to business need, innovation. That shadow or invisible IT is the true enabler of our sort of pioneering staff departments, businesses. And it's definitely worth embracing rather than suppressing. However, central monitoring and understanding has got to be key to supporting business approval, engagement, ensuring lack of duplication, identifying cost savings, and overall keeping the flashlight on in the basement. There you go. That's my parting words.
Great. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Dennis. We have a couple minutes for questions. The first one I'm going to ask is to you, Dennis. However, Will, feel free to jump in with any thoughts you may have. Dennis, in your research, did you see any concerns from customers re security of app hosting and transport in case of multi-cloud migration?
Sure. I'll give a short answer to that. I mean, the short answer is yes. Now, on the one hand, there's often the case in public cloud, security could be more effective than what you have if you haven't really done the job right in your own IT organization. But the complexity of all those interdependencies magnifies the need to bring security operations and ITSM together more closely in cloud migration. I realize that could be a much longer conversation, but that's my quick summary.
Well, the only addition I'll add to that is, as obviously we are hosted in AWS, we have seen sort of prospects and customers who, 2 years ago would have been like, no, not in the cloud, saying, actually, can we put this in the cloud now? Because it's the real changing, the changing world of that trust on the public cloud is quite obvious.
Great, thank you. That brings us to actually past the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up today. I wanted to thank our audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us. I do hope you'll check out the follow-up email from EMA. It will include resources from today's webinar, and I'll provide you a link to Scalable Software's website so you can find out more about them. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.